Hello, and welcome back now to this seventh episode of the Miramichi Historical Linkages podcast. I'm Sean McCarthy, and I'm joined today by Tasha Smith and Sarah Ward. We've been speaking the last week and again this week about oral traditions and oral histories. And last week we talked a little bit about how modern technology and oral tradition are sort of kind of meeting and creating new opportunities. And again, we encourage you, if you haven't done it now since last week, to reach out. And if you do know about other projects like the ones that Tasha talked about last week, to let us know, because we'd be really interested to hear more about them. And like I say, as always, if you have more interest, if you have any other interests in the work that we're doing and want to find out more, or have stories of your own that you would like to share, we would love to hear from you. This week, we'll be speaking a little bit more about one story that I've found multiple versions of, kind of a famous ghost story from the area. Again, very appropriate for us because we're recording this on the 28th of October, but you're listening to it sometime in mid to late November. So you're thinking, this is kind of passé for you, but very, very appropriate for us. So that's it. So we'll be talking a little bit about the Dungarvon Hooper today, but also setting up for our next episode, where Judy Bowman will be visiting with us, who has a great deal of experience in recording and sharing the stories of others, and so we're really anxious to speak with her. So, So the Dungarvon Hooper. It's an interesting story. So maybe since I've kind of come up against it a few times now in the research that I've been doing. Allison.
Hey.
Hi. Good timing.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see all of you. My meeting just finished. I'm jumping in.
Good stuff. So basically, we're talking about, we've been talking about oral traditions, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Dungarvon Hooper and set up for our interview with Judy next week. So, very good. So like I say, I've come across this story a couple of different times, a couple of different ways, but I'm curious to see, maybe from my colleagues here, have you ever come across, the story of the Dungarvon Hooper, the screaming ghost of the Southwest Miramichi?
You know what? I was actually going to ask you if you could give us a campfire version of this story, because I have spent my life in Miramichi, and for the vast majority of my life, every time somebody would say the Dungarvon Hooper, I would just go, "Oh yeah." And I had no idea what they were talking about.
That's
I
me.
sincerely spent years just being like, just play it cool. So I am wondering, Sean, if you would do us the honors to give us a campfire version of the Dungarvon Hooper story. Ooh.
So mark it down, ladies and gentlemen. Allie has been in the digital room for less than 3 minutes. And has already put me on the spot. There you go. That's it. So, that's it.
That's what I'm here
This
for.
is lovely. Apparently,
You keep
that's
telling
very
me
much
to
in
show
evidence.
up for recording days, and I do, and I don't know what you expect.
There you go. I am the author of my own fate, folks. That's it. All right. So, again, so there's so many different versions of this story. So what I'm going to do is I could go into the kind of the whole thing on any one version, but I think what I'll do is I'll kind of give some little kind of snippets of different versions that I've heard since we started. So the classic version of the Dungarvon Hooper, as I understand it, takes place in a lumber camp. So as early as the 1850s, there were stories about a haunted lumber camp somewhere in the Southwest Miramichi that were being published in the newspapers. And the stories kind of surround a young cook, maybe a cookie, so somebody that was either chiefly involved for food preparation in the camps or maybe was assisting the person that was. And unfortunately, this young man, some versions say his name was Peter Ryan, some say his name was Peter Garvin. He passed away. He died under mysterious circumstances one day, and suspicion has sort of fallen on the boss that he had been killed for his money. So in the famous poem in 1912 by Michael Whalen, there's the line, from the belt around his waist, all his money been misplaced, which made the men suspect some serious wrong. Was it murder, cold and dread, that befell the fair young dead, where the dark and deep Dungarvon rolls along? So again, there's this idea that the cook was killed for his money, and he was buried. Unfortunately, he could not be buried in the settlement. There was a snowstorm, so he was buried near the Hooper Spring. I don't believe it was the Hooper Spring before the events that I'm actually describing. Otherwise, it would be incredibly ironic or very appropriate, one or the other. So that's it. So he was buried there, and of course, there's the story goes that the screams that you hear are really the cook's hoops. So the cook was known to kind of hoop in the woods in order to call the men in from their labors. There's every evening to let them know, because of course nobody was kind of keeping track of time. But when supper was ready, he would hoop, and the men would come in. That was a way of kind of communicating in the woods. So the hoops are the cook's hoops, and he's hooping because, of course, he's been murdered and buried here, and so on and so forth. The story goes, and I'd really like to learn more about it. And apparently, there is a church register that confirms this. That Father Edward S. Murdoch went up and blessed the grave, and they say that after that, the screams stopped. So who knows? But apparently, there is some documentary evidence that I haven't seen, that I have heard about.
So what you're saying is we should bring a Ouija board and try to
Maybe.
summon the Dungarvon Hooper and ask him for an interview for our podcast.
I mean, if you can do that, Allie, I mean, more power to you. That's it.
Nope, I won't be doing that. Nope.
But, yeah. So, but I mean, this was the version that that's kind of best known, and that yeah. But of course, I think a lot of other people will say. And again, I think there's probably some logic behind that you have a community, an early settler community, especially in the 1850s. You have a lot of people that are, either first or second generation settlers in this community, and maybe are not familiar with, the woods of the Miramichi and the Southwest Miramichi as maybe we are today, and the animals that are resident therein. And, the nocturnal cries that they may make. And of course, like I say, if you're coming from a culture that maybe understands, things like the banshee and other kind of, or, the Kelpie or shape-shifting, entities or whatever, it may be a small step to go from, this strange sound in the woods to it being a ghost, especially, of course, because also, another article that I heard about, but I haven't read, talks about a lot of mysterious deaths that happened in the lumber camps in those years. So, again, as they've kind of talked about, all these gentlemen are all up in the woods all winter. If somebody dies, you know what I mean, and somebody maybe is the victim of foul play, I mean, who's to know, right? And so, and families may suspect that when they get, so. Again, all these kind of things coming together, suspected foul play and the deaths of some people, in the lumber camps, strange sounds in the woods, you know what I mean? It may be only a couple of steps to go to, somebody was murdered.
Right.
Their ghost is crying out in the woods. But who knows?
But we also see parallels between that and the Headless Nun.
Sure.
Right? Like, I don't know, that it always fascinated me with Miramichi how well we have hooked into this folklore of these hauntings that happen in Miramichi. Because I remember growing up, and that was always like a topic of conversation that was just casually brought up. It was like, oh yeah, did you know there's a haunting over down there? And there's another one in the woods down there. And some nun doesn't have a head in that forest. Like, it was just always something that was like a big part of Miramichi. And across all cultures too. It's never been something that was just strictly one culture when you think about already just between the Whooper and the Headless Nun.
So, because I'm fairly new to both of them, or I didn't grow up in the Miramichi area, what does the Headless Nun folklore pertain to? Is that more of like a Acadian?
Sean?
Sean?
Sean? Hey, Sean? Can you do us a favor real quick, Sean? I'll portray the Headless Nun over here. I'll just
right.
I'll act out the story. So Sean and I, fun fact, used to do a nighttime tour at French Fort Cove, along with a few other actors, and we would give a tour all the way through French Fort Cove and tell the story of the Headless Nun and costumes and the whole shebang, and it was a lot of fun. And now he's going to tell you the story of the Headless Nun.
So that tour is actually going to come back, and it's supposed to be relaunched again in 23. So I said it here first, but you may not have heard it here before that time.
Who's the nun, Sean? Do I need to come back?
Well, listen, like I say, if you're offering,
that was one of the most pleasant experiences of my. I had so much fun doing that tour.
I had such a wonderful time scaring people. I'd love to.
It was fun, again. Honestly, because you could see them through the costume. It's like the costume of the Headless Nun was essentially a black nun garb that sat on top of my head, that acted as the shoulders and then draped down, but I could see just barely, to be clear, so that people understand why I didn't run very quickly when I was in that costume. But you could see a little bit. But yeah, it just kind of like sat on my head, and it was always fun to see people's reactions. But anyway.
Did you go through the trails?
Yeah. Yeah, it was really cool.
I heard about it. I've never seen it because I know my friend there, Josh, used to be one of the actors, I think. Josh Holland.
He was, yeah.
It was a lot of fun. I highly recommend anybody listening to this right now to check it out. If it's coming back, that's fantastic news. Because that was awesome. And we got to scare people in real time, finding out that they had seen me run around in the costume and they thought I was the real Headless Nun, and started a rumor around town that they had seen the Headless Nun and she was back. And then the rumor got to my mother, and my mother told me when it happened, and I was like, that was absolutely me in costume. And I apologized.
When we tell that story on the tour, we leave that last part out.
You may have heard.
There were modern sightings. People saw that the nun came back.
Rumor is the nun is back, and then I'll just run in the background.
There you go.
I guess one of the landmarks is gone now with the tower. I think that was where the Headless Nun ran around. People seen it near the tower. That's where the Headless Nun was.
Well, and there's the story too of you see her down by the water because she wants you to help her. I won't jump to that. Sean, go ahead. Tell us that wonderful, incredible story.
I mean, that's fine. I'm sure you could have told it just as well. But yeah, basically the Headless Nun, story, the legend of the Headless Nun comes out of the 1750s, around 1758. Now it's set, I guess, at that time. The first versions of it don't come until the 19th century, so that's it. Whether or not there was a community of religious sisters here at that time, who's to know? There is no record of it, but again, this is the way. So it's said that Sister Marie Inconnu was resident here in the community in those years, in the late 1750s, and that fearing an attack by the British after they had destroyed the settlement downriver at Burnt Church, burning the church, when they did it in September of 1758, that valuables were gathered together. Among these may have been the crucifix and the chalice from that chapel that had been burned. And they were entrusted to her. They were buried in the cove along with other valuables from the community. And word of this came to either some versions say a mad trapper, some versions say it was a pair of leprous sailors who had escaped from a wrecked ship in Bay de Vin. And one night, as she was returning home across the Crowbrook Bridge, she was set upon by these attackers. They attempted to extort the treasure's location from her. She refused, and in a fit of rage, they murdered her by cutting off her head. Her head was left, fell into Crowbrook. Her body was left on the bridge. She was found the next day. It was sent back to France for burial, but her head was never recovered. And of course, the story goes that to this day, the headless ghost of Sister Marie Inconnu walks French Fort Cove, still protecting the valuables of her people and searching for the head that will one day make her body whole and allow her to rest in peace.
I remember when people would always say, you got to be careful, because if she ever asks you to go into the water to help find her head, you're in trouble either way. And it was like, well, that's not very promising. But they were basically like, either you help her and she drowns you, or you don't help her and she's going to try to kill you. And it was like, what a great story to tell a 10-year-old.
Lose-lose situation. That's an awful trickery.
It means you want to avoid the situation, but then you go to French Fort Cove and, can't help it.
Can I just pretend that I can't hear her?
Yeah. I can't hear you. I've got music.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, hey, whatever works. Whatever keeps you alive and safe. If you got to lie to that nun, lie to that nun.
There you go.
Yeah, that's the new tagline for this episode. If you got to lie to a nun, lie to a nun. Anyways, this will be our last episode.
There are the rails, and we are well off them now.
There's no coming back from this.
That's it. But yeah, a lot of interesting, kind of ghost story oral traditions from the community, and a lot of them that those are the two that we kind of know best. But of course, or maybe that the locals know best. But I think there are quite a few other ghost stories that I've come across as in research, and I'm sure other folk stories that you all have as well. That there's a really rich folk tradition here, but one that maybe that's I think sometimes acknowledged but underappreciated.
Yeah, I'd be curious to go more into just doing some more research, I guess, in our style of interviewing people, because I do find that a lot of these stories I'm not finding in books. I'm not finding on internet pages, right? Because I have these vague memories of people telling me these stories about around Miramichi, the hauntings on Middle Island, or the ghosts of St. Michael's, and all these things. And I'm like, you can't really find a whole lot online, because a lot of it is people talking to each other, right? Which again is why I love this project so much, because we're bringing that importance back to those interviews, or what we're calling interviews, but can flat out just be conversations with your family members. It's Halloween time right now while we're recording. Sit down with your family, ask them for some spooky stories, my friends, and then send them to me, because I love to hear them.
Yeah, and if we're going to get really metaphysical about this, I mean, that maybe that's maybe that's kind of what gives these restless spirits some sense of agency out there. You know
There
what I
you
mean?
go.
As we tell these stories, and we make people aware of some of the things that they're concerned about. That's it. That's yeah. I think that's maybe, like I say, maybe that's a little too kind of above what we talk about here normally, but that's it.
And I do think there was
I
so
think,
much tragedy throughout the years, right, in Miramichi. And I know that I guess again, in folklore, a big part of spirits being in unrest, a state of unrest, is not having had a proper burial, not having had a gravestone, which is something that you find a lot in Miramichi. That's the case pretty much all over Miramichi because of a series of different things that have happened over the years here. So it is interesting that the place that has so many of those situations also has so many ghost stories related to it. And you kind of have to wonder if it's like, we came up with these stories because we know there's a lot of unmarked graves and undiscovered grave sites. Or is it the other way around? Ooh,
It's
spooky Halloween.
I was thinking about what my grandfather said to me. I just seen him over the weekend or for a little get together, and he said, I got to get going because I have to go before it gets dark, because if I travel at night and I get killed, my soul will wander forever lost in the dark. And I'm always like, Papa, don't say that. But like, I don't know where it comes from, but he says it all the time when we're traveling, passing through. Yeah. And so I don't know if that's specific to the Mi'kmaq community, if it's just my Papa being my crazy Papa, which I love. But it's funny you brought that up because I was just thinking about that at the same time. I was like, oh, I'm getting chills. That's a little creepy.
Yeah. But yeah.
That's interesting because Joe was just talking to the group of young people this week, and he was telling them, like, he says, how we raise our children is by telling them to come back when the sun starts to fade in the yard, because if they're out there in the dark, then their soul get lost, and then they get lost in their lives. So you have to be careful not to be out wandering in the dark.
So even in life, there's that theory of if you're out in the dark, you can lose your soul and lose your way, kind of thing. That's I'd never heard of that.
Yeah. So, but anyway, because I know in my novel culture, that's what they say, that when we were young, it says that when the sun goes down, you go inside.
Yeah.
You go inside. It's time for bed, whatever. I don't know if it was a way of getting us into the house and going to sleep. And keeping us, where we're safe instead of wandering the roads or not. But if you think about it now, this generation, I find that the young people, they seem to want to be out there in the dark at nighttime.
Yeah.
And lots of not good things happen in the dark.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What's the old saying? Nothing good happens after 2 a.m.
I'm just snoring at that time.
That's interesting.
So I think
that Sarah and Tasha, you guys have both had the same thing being told to you from two completely, like Sarah, you were saying this was when you were little, when you were back home, versus Tasha being out here, like from two different areas, two completely different places, both being told, you lose your soul if it's out in the dark. Like you can't be risking that. It's really interesting.
It gives me more chills. Oh my goodness. I definitely don't listen to my Papa and all those little sayings. Oh.
Right. I'm going to start boarding up my windows as soon as the sun goes down. I don't know what's out
especially
there anymore.
Especially St. Margaret's.
St. Margaret's. You can't tell if it's a bug or a vampire coming to get you. They're so big. Oh my goodness. So I did miss, I guess, the beginning here where this was going to be just about the Dungarvon Hooper. And then I showed up.
No, I mean, it's great. Like I say, you know what I mean? It's interesting, like I say, to kind of delve into some of these stories. And I think, certainly the first of many, because again, I mean, I was in Fredericton all last week and, found all of these, I guess the last couple of days, all this week. And found a book from Colorado from 1902 that talked about the similarities between, kind of stories across cultures that kind of appear where, story elements kind of would appear in different culture stories. These, so like I say, kind of from Europe into like North America. So I'm sure that'll be something that I'll be sharing with you in the weeks to come, and hopefully something that we'll all be sharing with you, in months' time. That's it. So I think that's quite something that I think all of us as are kind of privy to certain understandings, I hesitate to say truths, but maybe truths, you know what I mean? As across all of our cultures, and are aware of certain things, and maybe have those things kind of given to us is, in kind of enraptured in folklore.
Yeah. I mean, I know that I've been reading a whole lot of different books about different parts of folklore, and about I even came upon things like a ghost ship, things like that, that I'm just like, it's all these things that I remember when we would have those like spooky stories around a campfire, we would tell. But I also remember at the time thinking that was just everybody around the world was hearing the same stories around the campfire, right? Because when you're 8, 9, 10 years old, it feels like what you know is what everybody else in the entire world must know. That has to be a shared experience, right? So it's really fun now going into finding the roots of these stories that I heard around campfires. And so yeah, that's another, I'm looking forward to being able to, because I know Sean and we had talked a little bit about werewolves and kind of their origin, and this like a werewolf craze that happened in France in the 1700s. So I'll save that for another day, another episode, but definitely interesting things that are kind of coming up when I'm looking into that side of the spiritual Acadian stories.
Werewolves. You kind of remind me of, from my culture, there's a lot of stories pertaining to skinwalkers.
Yeah. Yeah, which I haven't found in the Acadian like folklore at all, but like I'm aware of the stories of like Skinwalker Ranch and things like that. Like these are all things that on my own, because I have such a fascination with this stuff to begin with, where I love to find the root of these stories. Like what made us all of a sudden decide that this thing is happening, or this like supernatural event keeps occurring? Is it a bunch of people lying, or are we seeing things? But skinwalkers were one of them that I haven't stumbled upon yet in Acadian folklore. But maybe I'll dig a little more.
Yeah, and it's funny you guys are bringing up a werewolf right now, because I went to go pick up my husband from work.
And he's a werewolf?
How signs... Maybe, but I can't really see that online. Do you know how they have signs at different businesses that say things? Well, this business had a joke, and it was if you teach a werewolf to meditate, or if you teach a wolf to meditate, you have a werewolf. I'm like, oh, that's cute. And then you start talking about werewolves, and he's like, and I'm aware. And I'm like, that's so weird. That's like the whole joke right that's there, Allie.
I just became a werewolf.
Yeah, exactly. Just like that, after reading that sign.
Oh, the same one. Like, I know it's a little bit off topic. I'm sorry, but that business has really funny little liners. He's like, if you don't eat aluminum, or you'll sheet metal. It's like, that's funny. My husband's a sheet metal worker, so I was like, Hilarious.
That is good.
Okay, sorry, I'm getting off topic. We should get back and to introduce Judy.
Yes, indeed. So this is going to kind of draw us to a close here today. But next week, do please join us again for our conversation with Judy Bowman. And Sarah, would you mind maybe kind of giving a bit of an introduction to Judy, because I think you've probably known her longer than anybody else around the table. So maybe tell us a little bit about her and her background, and what she'll maybe bringing to us next week.
I met Judy a couple years back when I was taking courses at with UMB when the university program was still on the Miramichi, and we became friends, and we've been in contact with each other ever since then. And we kind of became family, I guess, and we go back and forth. She's done a lot of work in her own research, the way she does research, and she's a writer. She published a couple of books where she wrote some stories, and she actually got my husband and I's story in one of her books there. And she's been promoting writers. She's promoting actually the Miramichi, two of the writers of the Miramichi. So we also did research together, doing stories with covering the Indigenous veterans. It's where I worked with her. And then she also did stories of veterans on the Miramichi. And she worked for the seniors' home, so she got to know some of the elderly community here. So she has stories from them too. So both, all cultures, I guess, she worked with there. And so that's how I know her, and that's what she does. Her passion is writing, collecting stories, talking to people, interrogate me now and then. So she's a very knowledgeable woman of the Miramichi, and she is originally from Miramichi, but she lived away and she moved back here. So that's Judy for you. And when she comes in, she'll to our podcast, she will tell us more about herself and share with us some stories that she has uncovered on the Miramichi.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So we'll only have to wait a matter of minutes, ladies and gentlemen, to get to that. But you're going to have to wait another week. But we will see you then. Any last words before we kind of close up, everyone? Okie dokie. Well, we will see you again next week. And thank you very much for spending some time with us today. If you have any stories of your own, do please leave them below. And if you'd like to reach out to us, be sure to do so at linkproject@bogersisland.ca. All the best to all of you. We will see you again next week.